Good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started, and we will keep admitting people as they join. Thank you so much for being here for our April Nonprofit Cafe session. I don't even know how this happened. I don't know how it's already April. We are going to be chatting today with an amazing speaker who I can't wait to introduce in just a moment. But before we dive in, I do want to cover a couple of reminders and housekeeping items. First and foremost, oh gosh, my screen is going crazy. There we go. I want to thank our sponsors who make this program possible. Our headline sponsor, as always, is First Security Bank. And then our other sponsors for our in-person sessions are Rockford Coffee and the Bozeman Public Library Foundation. This session is being hosted by the One Valley Community Foundation, our local community foundation here in Gallatin Valley. Its mission is to connect people who care to causes that matter to build a better community. Before we get going, though, we would love to know who else is in the room. So I have two favors to ask of you all. Number one, if your name is not reflective of your actual name, if you could rename yourself, if you are sharing with colleagues or spouses or children, if you could rename yourself, that would be lovely so everyone knows who they're chatting with. And number two, if you could just pop into the chat box who you are and what organization you're with. We would love for everyone to know who's in the room and for us to be able to say hello. So I'm going to pop some instructions in the chat. And I realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Jill Elwood. I'm the Nonprofit Programming and Relations Manager at the One Valley Community Foundation. But thank you all for being here. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you for joining. It's great to see you. People are slowly putting their names in the chat. And for those of you who don't know, the chat box is located in the bottom panel of your screen. Hey, Cindy. Hi, Brittany. It's great to see you all. Hi, Sarah. Hey, Rusty. Awesome. Thank you all for being here. So many great organizations. Whether you're here on your computer or your phone, we are grateful to have you. Just a couple reminders as we get going. If you are not actively asking questions or we are not in a breakout room, if you could please keep yourself muted, that would be wonderful. You all have found the chat through your introduction, which is perfect. And then we are going to have a breakout session near the end of this session. So when we do go into the breakout session, if you'd be willing to turn your camera on, I'm sure people would love to see who they're chatting with. If you're not able to join the breakout session, you can stay in here in the main room with me. And then I do also want to mention, because we get asked every month, this session is going to be recorded and it will be posted on our website and YouTube channel later. So you'll be able to reference it if you would like, and also be able to share it with your colleagues. All right, now to the good stuff. I am so excited for today's session. Y'all, I don't know about you, but the number of times I have had to make plans and then change plans and pivot throughout the course of the pandemic has been kind of astounding and also mildly exhausting. This session is the perfect example of it. We actually had a different topic slated for today. And then I met Ashley, we met like 2 months ago. And I said, oh man, we need this topic. We need to learn more about how to plan for change, how to deal with change, how to do so in a way that is not draining and exhausting for our nonprofit sector. So I'm so excited to bring Ashley to all of you today. Ashley has extensive experience working with nonprofits, the government sector, and the private sector. She's the owner and CEO of a small business called Two Sons Consulting, and she works with multiple organizations and supports them in accelerating their mission and creating positive change. Before starting her own business, she served as a senior executive leadership team member, as the director of youth programs at the national nonprofit No Barriers. She's also supported youth organizations and schools nationally. She was the state of Colorado's Healthy Schools Manager for the National Nonprofit Alliance for a Healthier Generation, where she worked with high needs districts, schools, and communities to support a whole child approach in education. But the most amazing thing, I've never even heard of this until I met Ashley, but I love it so much. She holds a master's degree in organizational leadership with a specialization in change management and innovation from Colorado State University. So when she brings us this topic today, she really knows her stuff. So I'm so grateful to her for taking the time to share with us and for sharing her expertise. So all of that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley and allow her to get us started today.
Thank you, Jill. What a kind introduction. So thank you, everyone. Nice to have you today. Happy Friday. I'm Ashley. I do hope you have a cup of coffee or tea to enjoy together on this rainy day. So today we're going to talk all about change. So I wanted to kind of preface this presentation with, I really made the slides very robust, because I want this to be a reference for you. There's lots of information to cover and I don't want to rush it today. So I really encourage you to come back to these. They are meant to serve as not only a note taker for you and a reference guide, but also a visual aid. So they are very robust, but that's because I want it to be a resource for you. So like Jill said, I own and I'm the CEO of Two Sons Consulting and have the pleasure of helping businesses accelerate their mission for positive change. So today we are going to talk all about one hot word right now, which is our learning objectives for today are really 4 things. The first thing is going to be to understand some change management theories. So there are actually theories and studies and research behind change, how to manage change, how to plan for it. So we're going to briefly cover a few of those and give you kind of a base knowledge in case that's something that you would like to dive into at a later date. Then we're going to identify 3 critical focus areas for change so that it'll help you kind of compartmentalize how to organize different thought processes for change. And then we're really going to take some time, this will be the bulk of the time together, to create a toolbox for practical application for change. So some tips and some action items for you so that you have some takeaways and can apply them personally and professionally. And then we did carve out some time to network and share with others your bright spots. So we're going to talk today about how bright spots can really facilitate movement for change in a positive way. So I thought we could start with a fun little warm-up activity together. So if you wouldn't mind, in the chat box, I want you to put the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word change. And I am going to be very excited and interested to see what everyone comes up with today. So go ahead and put that in for us. Ooh, opportunity. Good. Growth. Necessary but scary. That's a good one. Excitement, equity, options. Good. I appreciate the honesty about it can be scary, it can be nerve-wracking, it can be exciting and scary at the same time. Change tends to generate a multitude of emotions and responses for people. Some people thrive and like change, others don't, and it can be very intimidating. Good. Excitement, tiring over the past years. Yes, certainly we have had a lot of change in our world the last few years. So thank you for participating. I'm excited to see some positive words reflected because I think the question presents itself, does change have a bad reputation? So is there fear of loss or leaving the comfort zone? Do we feel guilty when things change? Do we feel like change has happened and we haven't been able to have a say? Or really importantly, is there a fear of failure, right? I'm going to change and it's not going to work the way I want it to. So change can be a good thing, actually. It can be a good thing to adjust and modify. The important thing is to have a plan in place and to really have the right people on board and to be able to track that. So that's where we're going to go today. One thing is always constant, though. Change will always occur, right? So it can be good when it's evolutionary. It can be good when it supports and accelerates your work. It can be good when it aligns with the vision and the mission of your organization. And it can be good when it involves everyone. So I would say these are like the overarching themes today that I want to make sure come across in our presentation, is that we can turn change into a good thing. So we're going to dive into our first change management theory. It's called Lewin's process model of change. It was developed in the 1950s, so it's slightly outdated. And for some reason, there was a little text box here. I apologize, it's not showing, but it should say freeze, change, and refreeze. So the first piece of this is really looking at a preparation stage, right? So a lot of times we go into change and don't take a step back to really analyze things and understand what needs to change, making the case for change. And then there's the time period where change is going to actually occur. So this is where we put change into practice and keep communicating to provide support throughout the process. And then the refreezing frame of that is to avoid falling back into developing a strategy. So just making sure that we're checking in and we're making change stick and we're reviewing the measure. So this is, again, a whole theory on how to kind of map out the process of how change occurs and how to prepare for it. I used this to kind of inform the toolbox, so that's why I wanted to give you a little bit of a preface, but I'm not going to spend too much time on the leadership theories because I want to, encourage you to take the time to dive into the toolbox and make things really applicable. This is actually one of my favorite change management theories. It's Cotter's 8-step approach. It was created by a Harvard professor and a change management expert in 1996. It has since been expanded since 2014. So it's a little bit more recent. It feels a little bit more fresh. And there are 8 steps. So I will review them for you, but they'll really kind of take light when we get to the toolbox. So the first one is to create a sense of urgency. So you really want people to know, like, hey, like, we're doing this now. It's important that we do this, and to create some momentum and generate some movement around that. The second one is to build a guiding coalition. So it's really important with change that we are involving different voices in the process, gathering feedback, involving stakeholders. The third one is to form a strategic vision and initiative. So it's really important to go back to the vision and the mission of your organization. Do you have a strategic plan in place? Making sure that the changes that are occurring with or without your control, you're somehow trying to keep aligning to that strategy. Enlist in volunteers. So looking for change agents. We're going to talk about that today. Enable action by removing barriers. So if there's anything that's blocking your way to moving forward, especially positively, looking for ways to remove barriers. Generate short wins. So this is going to be a big one that we talk about today. I call it finding your bright spots. Sustain acceleration. So making sure to keep that momentum moving. So a lot of times change happens really quickly, it happens really fast, and then it becomes really stagnant. So how do we make sure to keep the ball rolling? And then to institute the final product of change. So eventually, whatever, however, and whenever change is occurring, it will taper off. I did list these for your reference. So there are many change management theories. These are some more of the top ones. So in your own free time, you're willing to do a fun little Google search and dive into those as well. So let's talk about the 3 critical focus areas for change. The first one of these is going to be content. So when we talk about content of change, we want to take a look at what in the organization needs to change, what structures are in place in order to support that change. Are there systems and processes and procedures in place in order to be able to help manage that? What technology can be used to support change? So is there something that can be used to capitalize that? The changes with COVID is a perfect example of how we all went to online meeting platforms and adjusted the way that we were working remotely. Are there different products available? Amazon's a great example for the change we made in COVID, right? So is there a different way to think about the way people are receiving and purchasing your products and or your services? That may adjust with change. And then really importantly, what is the strategy behind your change? So you're probably going to hear me say that over and over and over again, but it is important to think high level and then to break that down to the little steps that need to occur for change to be done successfully. The second critical area, so if you remember there's 3, the second critical area focus for change is people. So this is when we want to think about and talk about how is this change going to affect the people that we serve externally. So how are people in our network or maybe our clients, but also the people internally especially. So if you're having a lot of organizational shift or decision makings that have had a lot of impact, we want to think about the people that are in place. What are their emotions, right? What are their motivations? What's going to encourage them? How are you going to create that buy-in for change? Really important to look at mindsets and their commitment and resistance to the organization. Are they going to be defensive when you announce this change? Are they going to be reactive? It's natural to go through this. So are they becoming emotional? And how do we go about supporting that is the most important piece. Pretty quickly, you'll be able to identify how you think that your people are going to react. But what's important is to have, as part of your change management in place, what are you going to do to be able to support that reaction? So we really want to look at engagement, involvement, relationships, and how to build that as part of your culture. So the third piece for the 3 critical focus areas for change are process. So this is where your people and your content are going to come together. So when you focus on the process, this is really how people are going to work together to create a design and an implementation and that really robust action plan for how you should go about doing your change. Now, I'll be really honest with you. I've worked for organizations that did not handle change well whatsoever. In a matter of 6 months, we moved locations. We had a change in direction. We had a change in a vendor. We had someone that went on maternity leave, and this all happened really quickly and really rapidly. And so nothing was being planned for. Nothing was being talked about. So it takes time, but it's worth the time to take a step back, create an A to Z roadmap, and do some course corrections along the way, rather than just to make the assumption that, oh, people will just eventually get used to the change. Not necessarily true. And so we want to make sure we're providing a process for the change and making the time to do that. So we're going to do a fun little poll. So in your chat box, if you don't, or did you have a poll, Jill? I think you had a poll pulled up. I want to know, which critical area do you think is the most difficult to address? Do you think it's content? Do you think it's people? Or do you think it's process? So go ahead and take a quick little vote for us, and let's see what everyone thinks. And do you share that out with us, Jill?
I will. We have
perfect.
We have like 3/4 of the people have responded so far.
Okay, awesome.
All right. There you are.
Awesome. Yeah, people, no big surprise, right? I anticipated that response. So we're going to make sure that the bulk of the focus today is on helping to support the people through the process of change. So no big surprise. 78%, that's great. So we're going to move forward to creating your toolbox. So this is where you're going to really get the tips and the information to help you feel like you have actionable items to implement. I organized the toolbox based upon those 3 critical focus areas as a way to help everyone kind of process what target area would this mostly focus on. So just so you know, you'll kind of see that they're organized that way. So the first recommendation and action step is to update your strategic plan and make sure that your change initiatives are included. I don't know how many of you have updated your strategic plan recently. Many people went through the strategic planning process pre-COVID and then found that everything that they had mapped out was no longer relevant. So if your strategic plan has not been updated, I certainly encourage you to take the time to do that. Our work and our world and our people have changed so much that we need to make sure that your strategic plan is aligned with any change initiatives that are occurring in your organization. So really taking a look at, where is our vision? Where is our mission? Is that still true? Does it still resonate with everyone internally and externally to our organization? And also looking at when a decision is made for change, whether or not that be within or without your control, does it support your goals and objectives in your strategic plan? If it doesn't, maybe a step back may need to be taken to see about how that could be adjusted to make sure it's keeping you and your long-term vision for your organization on track. So that's the first action step. The second action step is to make sure that you're collecting any data that you have and that it supports the need for change. So what we need to do is we need to look at where are things getting sticky. This is where you have an opportunity for change to be positive in your organization. How can we make our work more effective? How can we make it more efficient? Does this align from the feedback that we're gathering from staff? And what data is telling me that things need to be adjusted? If you don't have any data collection models in place, I would highly encourage you to do them. They could be done from staff surveys, they could be done from participant surveys, and certainly if you're going to be focusing on a major change organizationally, whether that be with products, programs, staffing, you could put data systems in place in order to monitor that. And the reason why I say that is it gives you a trajectory along the line of change to be able to continue to check in and find out, is it being effective and is it accomplishing what you set out to do? So there's a variety of different ways to do that, but just make sure that the data that you need to have that supports the change is being done right off of the bat. The next action step is to create a change management work group. This is the best way I can define a change management committee. Does it happen very frequently? I haven't seen it happen very frequently, but I really encourage you to do it. And the reason why is because when we talked about one of the most critical focus areas of people, when you don't involve people in the change, you are going to have a more defensive and emotional reaction to change. So one of the best ways in order to combat that is to involve them in the process, and not only involve them to honor and hear what it is that they're sharing with you and to adjust accordingly. So ideally you want to involve every layer that you can. So start with early engagement immediately. Find employees that can be involved in the design that are more likely to agree with and identify with the change. Definitely senior leadership should act as a coach and a guide for the process. And be sure to take into account, like I said, what they're continuously telling you, because it could make and break your initiatives. So if you're hearing the same feedback from different levels of employees within your organization, sharing the same messaging, and it's not aligning with a decision for change that you've made, then that should definitely be listened to. But it gives you the opportunity to create diversity in your representation across your organization to help support those change initiatives. So we're going to move from content now to people. The biggest step for managing people is to lead with your culture. So look for ways to honor the emotional connection to your organization. Many of us are focused in work that is in service to others. So just continuing to repeat that messaging of why are we here? Why is our work important? Who are we serving? And to try to identify that with the social norms that exist within your organization. So make sure to take a step back, and as part of your change management plan, it's helpful to identify what are our social norms, how do we define the culture of working here, and to really make sure that we're honoring our different perspectives of those who are involved. So nobody is right or wrong in this process. No feedback is right or wrong. It's just a collective to work together in order to try to find the best fit. And again, make sure when you're doing your change management plan that in your plan, you're identifying the culture and the people and the norms, including how that's going to inform your communications. So we're going to go there next, but when you're communicating out your change and how that's going to be received and perceived, it's really important to take this into consideration. So the next step is going to be looking for those change management champions. So I really encourage you to identify at least 2 informal leaders and make sure that they are part of your change management work groups. Look for ways to have actionable steps, right? So we really want them to be able to support the process, be a part of your data and evaluation, and lead the process in your organization. Oftentimes change falls on top of the senior leaders of the organization, And what we have found to be more successful is that when you involve different layers within the organization who agree with and can be change agents for the organization, it's going to create more momentum for acceptance about that change, because they don't feel like it's going to be so top down. They're going to feel like it's actually very multi-layered within your organization. So ideally, you want your informal leaders to be pride builders. You want these people to really represent who you are and who you are as far as your vision and your mission and your service to others. You definitely want them to be change and culture ambassadors, but they also should be trustworthy. So these are people that you should feel like you can have a really good, open, honest conversation with, and that you'll be able to clearly communicate with one another, because they're going to be your greatest feedback point, and they're going to be your greatest trusted advisors for you to understand what's truly going on the ground. The next action step for your people, and this is a tough one, guys, I'm going to own it myself, is that it starts with you. So if there's change that's happening that you don't agree with, but you have to lead it, it's going to get picked up on really fast. And I have personally been in this position where an executive committee made a decision, I didn't agree with it, and it had a direct impact with my department. So they knew that, and that made things even more difficult. So the first piece of it is that you have to find the confidence in your decision for change and be able to reflect that without fear or uncertainty. So setting yourself up with a toolbox, but also with some time for process and self-reflection, so that you can say, do I really agree with this change? Am I ready to be one of those change agents? I may be someone formally leading this process. I may be someone informally leading this process. But if you don't agree with it and you're not on board with it and you've been tasked with leading it, you should definitely make sure that that's being known and communicated as well. So making sure that your pre-communication is really, really well done before you launch is also another important piece of this. So use your change management work group or the committee that you have put together and review and provide feedback regarding the communication that you're going to put outwards, because you're going to want to identify how are people understanding this and how is it being perceived before you just send it. So I would really encourage you, before you articulate anything in writing or verbally, that you draft it out and get some feedback to make sure that the underlying messaging that you want to come across is coming across correctly and it's not going to be misinterpreted. All right. So another really robust action step for you is to release your communication strategy as part of your communication plan. So again, you should ideally have some type of a strategic change management plan in place that is going to map out all of this, creating your work group, creating your communications, creating your data, and reviewing this so that you have really a map in order to navigate how and when that you're going to go about doing this. So make sure that the rational and the emotional go together. People are going to respond to a call of action when you identify with their heart and when you identify with your mind. Many of you probably are familiar with work regarding marketing or branding and how you represent yourself. This is almost the exact same thing. So you want to make sure that however you message what is going to be changed or what is changing, that you're constant in that communication. So whether that's words that you've identified that resonate, or strategies that have been identified that resonate, you want to make sure that that keeps repeating throughout the communication strategy as part of your change management process. That way your messaging is identified as a way to help inform the reasons why and how this can be beneficial. So we're going to move, we've covered content, we've covered people, now we're going to cover process. So we're going to start at the top and we're going to really think about, we do still need to have a committed and well group of executive and leaders for change. So even though we've talked about creating this change management work group, a committee, and you've identified having a variety of employees as part of that process, it really does still have to start and be supported at the top. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. We talked a little bit about this, but the first one is the leaders should agree about the change decisions. If there's not an agreement, then you should adjust as needed so that there's a stronger consensus. So that may mean that you meet in the middle somewhere, but if the majority of the leaders aren't in some type of an agreement, the likelihood of your change being successful is very small, because your employees are going to be able to see the disconnect in the agreement organizationally. And again, the leaders should be ideally the ones who create and manage the change management plan in conjunction with that change management committee, and should be frequently tracking progress and evaluating it. One of the ways to do this, we're going to dive a little bit more into the data piece, but is to look at ways to do engagement collection with Informa interviews and surveys. So if you haven't done an Informa interview process lately, I would really encourage you to do that. The way that those work is it's actually an interview process. It's a conversation. They can be done objectively with a third party that comes in, and so that you're getting anonymous and confidential feedback and looking for overarching themes and messaging as a way to create feedback loops and listen on what you should be acting on and adjusting to, but in a way that doesn't call anyone out. It can't be tied back to anyone's name or title or who they represent organizationally. So it's a great way to gather objective feedback, identify overarching messages and themes, but remove the who you're hearing from so they don't feel defensive. It's also important to be willing to adjust and think differently. So throughout a change process, being able to assess and adapt to the change is going to be very necessary, because it's never going to be a one size fits all. The box is not going to be all encompassing. So it's going to be something that's going to continue to evolve. So really look for ways to adjust the process if the data that you're collecting identifies that you need modifications. And make sure to keep your change fluid and be willing to think just a little bit differently outside of the box. This is where my innovative hat comes into play. But innovation can be a really interesting thing too. So have we been doing our work or our personal lives even the same way for a really long time? And is there a way to do it differently and to do it better that's maybe just a little out of the ordinary or not a traditional way to go about thinking? So it's important to just be willing to go outside of the box a little bit. All right, our next action step is really going to be looking at a support and a reward system for change. This may sound a little archaic or traditional methods, right, of rewarding and honoring our employees, but it actually goes a long way. Everybody likes to be told not only that they're doing a good job, but they like to feel valued and they like to feel appreciated. So looking at a way to kind of leverage some formal solutions can really help with this. Behavior change isn't necessarily enough. So if we can look at some reward systems or some way of operating in order to support our employees, professional development and training is a great way to do that. Are you allowing professional development budgets, for example, if someone wants to take a training or a day in order to bring someone into your organization to be able to provide that for you? But if you've created a really big change movement, again, with or without your control, and if you're hearing back from your employees, wow, I just need some support. I don't know quite what I'm doing. I don't know how I'm doing it. Can I get some training? Can I get some knowledge or some expertise that makes me feel more comfortable with that? Then investing in that can go a long way. I'll give you an example of that, but a really good example would be an organization that maybe has done donor management tracking on an Excel sheet for a really long time, and you just moved to a new software platform. That can be really intimidating. It can be really empowering. You're going to have lots of tools and new things to keep track and really increase your fundraising efforts. But it can also be really scary, especially if someone's not comfortable with a software system. So if you provide the training and the resources and the knowledge and the support in order to implement that, then you're going to see that go a long way. And it's also important to understand what motivates your employees. So don't hesitate to ask, survey your employees. It can even be an anonymous survey, but find out from them what interests you, what would you like to participate in, what makes you excited to go to work every day, and looking for ways to incorporate that as part of your system for change. This is my absolute favorite one and what I would like to be the highlight of our conversation today. It's on process, and it's about finding the bright spots. So if any of you haven't read the book, I'll hold it up. It's called Switch. It's one of my absolute favorite books. I have it in your resources and your recommendations, but it's how to change things when change is hard. So it's one of my favorite organizational books if you haven't read it. And one of the things that they recommend is finding the bright spots. And I love opportunities to make sure that things have a framework of being positive. So what we mean by that is we want to identify what is working. So it's very easy to fall into a pattern or a habit of what isn't working. So I want you to try and shift your mind around and say, well, let's take some time to identify what is working about this. Let's look for ways to replicate that success. And then ideally what you want to do is you want to take employees who have figured out how to make it work really well and have them be change agents. So give them the opportunity to train and share with others what they're doing and how they're doing it differently where they're having some success. So the goal here is to be solutions focused rather than problem focused. We definitely want to make sure that whatever is working is being captured as part of your data and your metrics and your change management plan. So again, however you're collecting that feedback and that progress, make sure that you really identify what is being successful. So we're going to take a little bit today and do a breakout. I think we have plenty of time, Jill. So we were going to allow everyone about 10 minutes or so to break into a group. And what I'd like to do is give you a little bit of time for some reflection and also for some conversation to find and discuss a bright spot. So I want you to think about a change that your organization has made within the last 2 years. If it's not something organizationally that's resonating with you, you can certainly pick something personally that you've changed as well, because this overflows a lot into how we lead our personal lives as well. And then I would like for you to identify a bright spot from that change. So what is something that was successful about that, and how can you share that with others in a way that might be able to be replicated? Are there any questions before we break out? Okay, so I think Jill's gonna separate everyone by 3 to 5 people. And while we're separating you out in your break rooms, maybe you can just think about what it is that you'd like to share. And we'll come back together. And what do you think, 10, 15 minutes, Jill?
Yeah, that sounds great. It's 9:38, so we have plenty of time. And I do want to mention, y'all, if for some reason you're in a position where you can't join the breakout room, if you're in a communal office space or something like that, if you want to stay in here with me, you're welcome to. But I think the conversations will be really fruitful. So I highly encourage you to join them if you're able. And turn it back over to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Jill. So I don't know about you guys, but our breakout room really had a good, robust conversation with not only just talking about change and some things that have happened regarding the change, but then also taking a moment for reflection. So I really appreciated that. I definitely heard some conversation about maybe there is some staff inclusion, utilizing social media and website and all that to enhance some things, being excited about having new people with a lot of talent and energy. So I thought, since we have good time today, and I want to make sure we have enough time for some questions discussion at the end, but is there 1 or 2 people that had like a really big aha moment or heard something shared where they felt like, oh, wow, like we gave ourselves a time to step back and process and reflect, and maybe we actually have had a few bright spots? So is there like 1 or 2 people that might be willing to share with a larger group of a reflection from your breakout? Feel free to just jump in. Anyone?
I can share. I mean, Ashley, you were in my breakout. So really the aha for me was more kind of listening to you about communication and like, my biggest sticky wicket is my board. I feel like our team during change, I'm a pretty robust communicator, and within the team dynamic, but with the board, because you meet quarterly and maybe you're on committees and they're volunteer, it's just so much harder for me to communicate to them. But really what it is getting feedback and being willing to let the board communicate with you their response instead of controlling it. I'm a pretty controlling ED, and I like to have the answer, and deliver it out and say everything's fine. So kind of letting go a little bit and bringing that board into the conversation space and slowing down and just having a plan so that they feel, oh, I can see this, how this is going to work, instead of the trust me story. Just trust me.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Like having something tangible and visual and creating that opportunity. It's an opportunity for vulnerability. That's hard to say, like, okay, I'm doing my best, or but also opening up that time for conversation, for feedback. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Any others? One or two, maybe one more? Anyone else want to share? Okay, well, we'll definitely make sure there's time at the end. And I would encourage everyone that if you have questions or you'd like to have a little bit of an open conversation, I really wanted to make a placeholder for that, because learning from each other is one of the best ways to figure out, okay, now we have this toolbox, we have the knowledge, we have the research theories behind it. Let's actually tangibly give some examples to it and talk through how it can look and work and feel for you specifically. So I'm going to go through in conclusion, our 5 takeaways. Can everybody still see the slide deck? Are we good? Nope, I'll have to reshare it. Okay, just a second. So let me. All right, can everybody see it now?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So here's your 5 big takeaways, and then we'll open it up for questions, reflection, and discussion. The first one is that change is hard. So it's okay to say, wow, this is really hard, and it's complex, and there's a lot of layers that are going on here. So what can help you feel more empowered is having a plan in place and some techniques and some tools in your toolbox, which can make it easier. Because like it was pointed out, there is this feeling of a lack of control. And the more that you can feel like, okay, I've got some plans in place, or I've identified some next steps, or even I just have a process for change, it's just going to make you feel like you have a little bit more control over the situation, and that'll help alleviate that feeling of it being hard. The second one is that change starts with you. So this is a big one, but just remember that how you present and represent yourself, your attitude, your acknowledgement, your accountability for what is going to be translated out from some of this change, and having a plan to reflect, it really comes down to being confident. And one of the best ways to be confident when it comes to change is to come feeling prepared and being supportive of the decision. So letting people know that you are feeling ready, you're feeling willing, you're going to be there as part of the process, but that you feel confident and that you have an action plan that's going to be in place in order to support everyone through that can definitely help. This was a big one, number 3, and I was happy to hear this come up in my breakout room, that it sounds like, at least for some organizations, this is happening, and I'm so glad that participation is key. So definitely make sure to involve all levels of your organization, and communication is imperative. How is your messaging being received, perceived, processed, and make sure that you're getting feedback for that. The fourth one is look for new ways to motivate. So we touched on this a lot, but just start thinking differently about how can I provide support, and how can I provide the training and a reward system for our employees so that they feel valued, they feel like they're receiving the tools that they need in order to be successful, and then they're also getting accolades and recognition so that they're feeling a really high level of appreciation while things are actively changing. And then the 5th one that we focused on our breakout session for was finding those bright spots. So really, again, I really highly encourage you to stay solutions focused and look for ways to train according to those bright spots, share information around what's working successfully, and then just keep repeating that. So instead of honing in on what's not working, continue to focus on what is working and make sure that that's being broadcasted widely and shared frequently. So I'm going to open it up for questions and reflections. I want to make sure, since it's the last slide, that everybody knows that there's our resources and a reference list. So these are research papers and articles that I used in order to put this presentation together that you can go do some of your own individual reading on. And then again, my top book recommendation is called Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Chip and Dan are amazing. I've actually participated in a professional development that they've led in person, and they have a couple of different organizational books. If you haven't heard of them before, I highly recommend some of their resources. So why don't we open it up for the group? I know I saw a quick question from the chat box before we broke out. So happy to start there. How do you usually facilitate questions and discussion, Jill?
If people want to jump in, if they have a question, they're welcome to. I also had a couple people that had to jump off at 10. They got double booked.
Oh, sure.
And so they sent me their questions and then said, I'll watch the recording later. Can you ask?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, let's do it.
So yeah, if anyone has questions at any point, feel free to jump in, but I will start with some that came in through the chat box. The first one was, since change is constant and adaptive, when would we implement a change management plan versus simply managing in an inclusive, forward-leaning way?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I saw that come through. So my first recommendation would be to always have in place some type of a change management work group or an advisory council that you could lean into. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have to meet frequently if you're not going through a lot of change, but it may be beneficial to have them meet once a month, once every other month, just to kind of check in on how things are going. So let's give an example that if change were to happen really quickly, for example, and it's going to take too much time and resources to put together a formal response plan, if you already have this committee of people are in place, then you can convene them really quickly in order to get feedback and to make a plan on how to move forward without putting together like a formalized document. I would make sure that as part of that committee, I kind of jotted down that there's 4 pieces that are discussed as part of that committee when there's any type of change that's being discussed. The first one of those would be to identify and make sure that it's in alignment with your strategic plan or your organizational strategy and your vision and mission. So you can talk and discuss that with your work group without having to put a formal plan in place. The second piece of that would be having them review any type of communication that's going to go out and to get their feedback before you're broadcasting any type of verbal or written communication outward to your whole organization or the community or your stakeholders. The third piece of that is if you can take the time to put some type of data in place, whether that be surveys, whether that be Informa interviews, whatever it is, just having an opportunity to reconvene and relook at that data together can also be really powerful because it can give you tangible things to react to quickly and make adjustments accordingly, even if you don't have a formalized plan in place. And then the fourth piece that that council or committee should always be helping with is making adjustments as necessary because they can move quickly and react really efficiently. So just looking at, oh gosh, okay, what is working? What isn't working? Why did this happen? How can we work collectively together to address this before it gets too big and is out of our control? So hopefully that's helpful. So that would be, but if it is going to be something like very, very large structural change or organizational change, and you have the time to either make sure that change is addressed as part of your strategic plan or to create a coinciding change management plan, I would encourage you to do that if it's going to be something that is anticipated and is going to be a heavy lift.
Perfect. Does anyone, I have a couple more that came in through the chat. Does anyone else have a question they would like to interject before I go back to the chat questions? All right. Chat question number 2. And I think in your last answer, you did actually touch on this one a little bit, but I will ask it anyway if you want to elaborate a little bit more in this direction. A lot of the discussion today was about when you were anticipating a change, and someone asked, when you're not anticipating a change, but there are outside factors that kind of force you to change. I'm guessing that might have to do with COVID or something like that, but whatever it might be. The person said, how do you find a balance between reacting quickly and taking a step back to implement some sort of plan when you're not anticipating a change coming?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, yeah, I kind of answered that in a previous question because that's the way I was interpreting it. So, you know, again, having your committee in place, and if you have data that's already in place that you can pull quickly in order to help inform that and come up with some type of action plan or actionable steps in order to move that forward quickly is really beneficial. So even taking the time to create the infrastructure, even if it's not a formalized plan, will give you something to rely back on when things are happening really quickly that you may not have the time or the resources resources or the capacity to put together a formalized plan.
Perfect. And then the third question that I got directly chatted to me was about who's part of this decision making. I think as the nonprofit sector, as most of the people in this training are, like a lot of our decisions affect the community or clients. And so the question was, when talking about integrating people at different levels that will be affected by the change, would you recommend integrating community voice? And if so, how would you go about collecting that information?
Yes, absolutely. Especially when your work is so integrated into the community that if you organizationally and structurally make decisions for change that could have a big impact on your delivery model, then 100% you should be involving stakeholders in the community. One of the ways that I would highly recommend doing that is doing Informa interviews with all of your stakeholders. One of the best ways to do that would be to identify people that you serve or that have frequently been involved in your programs and collectively gathering that objective feedback and looking for those overarching themes or messaging that you can identify as part of that, but it removes them from feeling identified or directly targeted as far as gathering that feedback. If that's not something that's within your capacity, then even just doing a simple survey can be helpful. Like you could email or broadcast out to your network that you're going to be doing a collective feedback and you acknowledge that some things have occurred or changed and you'd like to check in with them, and that you'll be sending like a Survey Monkey or a Google Forms, for example, and just sending that out and then gathering it and reevaluating collectively from there. And again, that's why it's so helpful to have some type of like a change work group or a change committee, because then you can convene that, it's already in place, you can call a meeting and you can process and digest that information very quickly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions that came in through the chat. Does anyone else have any questions for Ashley today? Thoughts, reflections, one thing you'll take home?
Yeah, is there any take homes from today that anyone wants to share? Great, quiet Friday group. Well, I'm sure everyone will appreciate having a little bit of time back in their day. I allotted some time for discussion, but yeah, I'm glad. Hopefully it was beneficial. Hopefully you feel like you have some actionable, tangible ideas that you can bring forward for you organizationally.
Ashley, thank you so much for taking the time to share. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone, thank you for taking time out of your day to learn with us. Before we go, I do want to make one announcement. Our intention for the year was to do every other nonprofit cafe session virtually and every other nonprofit cafe session in person, and Delta and Omicron had their own plans for this year. So as you all know, we haven't gotten together in person since November, but we are planning on the May session to be in person. So please, 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 if you register for our May nonprofit cafe session, make note that it will be in person and we will see you at the library. Ashley, thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. We are so grateful. And I will be sending out information with the recording and the slides and with Ashley's contact information. So if you want to get in touch with her and work with her, you will be able to get a hold of her.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks, everyone. A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Happy Friday, everyone.
Bye.